On today's show, look, it's been fun. We love talking Tatis. We love talking about Jake the Rake Cronenworth, but it's time for another prospect update for my good friend and the guru of all prospect things, talking about not just Jackson Merrill Madness, but also guys like Jeremiah Estrada, Robby Snelling, some reinforcements, the Graham Pauley be just free him, please. We'll be talking about all that and much more on today's episode. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for either Thursday, April 25th or Friday, April 26th. Can't lie, I don't know just yet. Bear with me, folks. I, of course, am your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always, the most, Javier Reyes. You can find me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, or you might be familiar, perhaps, with my work over at Just Baseball, which is a great website. You can find me writing about not just the Padres, but general baseball stuff, and also have a podcast there called Baseball versus the World, which is just a little bit more fun and goofy. And speaking of Just Baseball, my guest today is, I believe he's been on the show about 57 times, so this will be the 58th. It is Aram Leighton, co-founder of Just Baseball, host of the Call Up podcast, co-host of the Just Baseball podcast. He does a lot of prospect stuff, and he's a baseball nerd and whatnot. Aram, as always, how you doing?
Doing great, man. Doing good. It's fun. It's like if you kind of go through each of the episodes that I've been on now, like it's been a cool matriculation to the big leagues for like a Jackson Merrill. We were talking about him at one point in single A, and now we're talking about Jackson Merrill, the successful big leaguer. So it's kind of cool to see that path through. And, we don't even need to talk about Campusano anymore because he's just getting his opportunity and he's finally, getting consistent reps and showing well and doing well. So like, it's cool to see that. And we get to start all over again with the Graham Pauley conversation and some of these other prospects, but it's awesome because the Padres are always good in the farm system. No matter what AJ Preller does, they reload, baby.
They reload. It's the one thing, even if you don't like AJ Preller, that he seems to be able to do. So we're going to be talking about all that stuff on today's podcast, guys. The farm system, state of the Padres farm system is basically what we're going to be doing. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you by Prize Picks, though, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code, all lowercase, LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Arm, I will disagree with you, though, on one thing. I think it's always okay to talk about Luis Campusano. I don't think it never goes away. Shouts to our guy, two hits the other day, 2 doubles. So hopefully keeps that going. But I want to start off by talking about the most obvious thing, which is Jackson Merrill. Merrill Madness. It's been the hashtag that's all over Twitter. And like you said, we've been talking about it for a while. I've been talking to you since the Mackenzie Gore days, right? Yeah. And I'm not talking about like the trade. I'm talking like before he debuted type of stuff. So
yeah, like what's going on with him? Yeah, that was the whole thing.
That was a whole crisis, dare I say. But here we are, new faces of the Padres' young group of players. And it's been a while since they've had one come up that has been a contributor immediately and been an elite contributor immediately. And that is Jackson Merrill. Basically, since, dare I say, Tatis was kind of the last one that they called up that they were excited about and produced immediately the way that Merrill has, which is refreshing and fun. What do you think so far of Jackson Merrill? Because he's been like the big X factor thing that I think has kept this team above water.
No doubt. And I think that they identified him as that during spring training, and it was palpable. I know like as prospect guys, we can tend to be optimistic because, you're seeing these guys dominate against their peers. You see the talent and you can kind of dream on what they can be. And I always try to hold myself accountable with that and say, okay, but let's go through the shortcomings that this player has. Where could he run into trouble when he gets to the big leagues? How are big league pitchers going to exploit him? And usually that'll guide me to a middle ground and or as close to it as I can get. And I go from there. With Merill, the question originally, the first time I saw him in person, Arizona Fall League, was, how's his defense going to be at shortstop? I'm watching that guy just work so hard early before the games, hanging out after, getting his reps in. I talked to him after the game about that. And just the way that and at that point he was 19, the way that he kind of goes about his business, his perspective on the game at that point, I already was like, okay, this kid's a little bit different. The way he was able to add physicality, but still be able to be agile and quick. Then you have this center field situation. And I kind of called back to that shortstop conversation that I had with him. I'm like, he's going to do the same thing all over again. I get out to Arizona. I go out and see him in person. And I was floored at how comfortable he was out there right away. I was talking about it on the call up. Like, Jazz Chisholm's a phenomenal athlete and he's turned himself into a good center fielder. But do you remember the first few games? There was times where Jazz Chisholm looked like a guy who had never played center field, understandably so. Merill, like, I'm sure someone could probably find a clip here or there at some point, but Merill, for the most part, never really looked like a guy that had never played center field before. And remember, at the end of last year, they started playing him in left a little bit, but not really center. So that was what stood out to me. And then that he commanded his at-bats. Like, this guy's running a new position, trying to make a big league team, and then just in total control of his at-bats. With 2 strikes, a lot of guys, you kind of see the tensing, you kind of see them pressing a little bit more. Merill, it just looks like the same guy, no matter the count, no matter the situation, no matter the position. And I think you're seeing that shine through. And I think he's still just scraping the surface of what he can ultimately be. There's a lot of tools, a lot of projection to like here.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, this hasn't been a guy who's been like a power in the traditional sense, like not a lot of home runs. He only has 1 on the year. Did have one that he was close to, I believe, in the last series the Padres played, or I think it was against the Brewers. But for me, what has been impressive is exactly what we talked about. And I love that you brought up Jazz too, where I'm like, I'm so upset that I know what you're talking about. That's how much I talk to you, that I understand Marlin stuff. But with Merill, the big thing that I remember we talked about was just bat to ball stuff. And for me, what's so impressive is I've seen him swing at such bad pitches. Like, I have. And in fact, it's displayed by his stats. He has a bad chase rate, right? But he always is making contact. Like, at the very minimum, he's spoiling pitches. He puts together productive at bats even, where you're just like, all right, that one didn't last 1 pitch. It went 6 pitches. And the pitcher actually had to go after him a little bit. And with the demeanor, I mean, he's got the face paint sometimes. Like, he has this vibe of someone who's so hungry, and like he plays the game like it's a playoff game every single time. Which is really awesome. And I think that for a team that has so many stars, a lot of egos, a lot of big personalities, to have this kid come in who's just really ready to just contribute and kind of look like a professional already, I really love. I remember you might have heard the 8-run comeback that happened a couple weeks ago, where like you see him looking so amped in the dugout for Tatis, right? And he's one of the people that starts it too with his bloop single. So I've just been super impressed. And I think that this is not the norm for prospects, obviously, but I think this is just why you hold on to some of those top ones. And, Padres fans, and I remember some of them, tweeting at me or messaging me being like, yeah, well, CJ Abrams was supposed to be great. It's like, first of all, it's happening right now as we speak. It's happening. Do we potentially prefer him at shortstop over Xander Bogaerts? That's a discussion for another episode. But like, Merill just seems like one of those rare guys that might be good immediately. I'm wondering, though, the only thing I mentioned, power. Do you think he can tap into that this year? Or is that something that, look, he's super young and it's not going to happen? Is this guy a Ben Zobrist type? I know I always bring up that player, but just bat to ball, going to be on base, play some good defense, be that perfect player that won't make all the headlines, but helps every team.
I think he can be better than that. And when I was making the case for, for him to potentially make the opening day roster, that was early on. I know you had shared it, and Padres fans, were really excited in the comments. And, I at that point, I think it was a little bit more of a hot take, and it was right after I'd caught him early in spring training. The case I kind of made was that there were some similarities on like a lighter level. It's not going to be, he's not as tooled out, but there were some similarities to what I think could be the progression of Christian Yelich on a little bit of a lighter level, right? Yelich always hit the ball a little bit harder, but the point being, kind of a slender frame. Merill is filled out more though, but a guy that was so polished in Yelich that he was able to fly up through the minor leagues and was ready to contribute at the big league level, but it didn't quite come together from a power perspective until year 3 or 4 for him. And then he really exploded, with the power. I think with Merill, and that was like 20 home runs to 40. I think with Merill, it's going to be 10 to like 20 to 25 because the batted ball data is there. And you'll see flashes of it where, like, I think you mentioned a couple balls that he's hit really hard. I think he hit a ball like 107 for a double off of Kyle Hurt that was just didn't get out, but it was 380 feet. Like, he's got the power in there. I think right now he's trying to juggle what you were talking about, the ability to spoil pitches, the adjustability, which is a huge strength for him. His out of zone contact rate, 73%.
Yeah.
Small sample, but that's going to be one of the best figures that you'll see in Major League Baseball if he can sustain it anywhere near that. So like that's who he is. He's a guy that's going to spoil. He's going to spray balls to all fields. But I think as he gets more comfortable in the big leagues and getting comfortable going deep into counts, like knowing, hey, it's a 2-0 count, I'm going to let it eat here and try to pull one, into the second deck. And if I miss it, okay, recalibrate 2-1 and go from there. I think that's the nuance that he's still feeling out, and understandably so. Most guys can't even get up here and do close to what Jackson Merrill is doing offensively. So I do think the power is going to come. I think you'll start to see it tick up in the second half of the season, but I don't know if we'll really see 20 home run Jackson Merrill, maybe until year 2 or even year 3. But I wouldn't, if it doesn't come in the first year or 2, I wouldn't say, oh, Merrill's never going to hit for power. This kid turned 21 5 days ago. He's flown through the minor leagues, and the contact is a big part of who he is. But I do think that that's going to come later on.
Absolutely. And for me, the biggest thing was, look, 2 outs above average, if you want to go by that in terms of the defensive stuff. The robbing of Shohei Ohtani's hit against that Dodgers in the Dodgers series, may or may not have watched that a couple times before this very podcast. But for me, I think it is simple as this, is that you had Trent Grisham in your center field for a long time. No shots to Trent Grisham. I got love for the guy, but could not do anything offensively. He just couldn't. He had all the power in the world, but no bat to ball. That's just seemingly what kept happening. Or it's a weak grounder that turns into a double play. He hit 2 double plays last week with the Yankees. So for me, it was all about, can he just be above average offensively?
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm sorry, can he be above average defensively? Because I felt like the offense could be at least solid. I don't care if he's a 102 WRC plus guy. I don't care. But the fact that he might be more than that, I really think that's been why the Padres have been staying afloat despite some of their inconsistencies, and shows you, sometimes you believe in the young guys and give them a chance, even if maybe, we're not talking about Raul Acuna Jr. here in center field. We're not talking about prime. I don't know why I thought of Denard Span. Was Denard Span good?
Good, but I don't know if he was like.
Yeah, no, okay. So that was a bad example, but a really top tier outfielder out there that you're replacing Trent Grisham, and the bar was a little bit low. So sometimes it's good to give young guys a chance. And speaking of giving young guys a chance, we're going to talk about Graham Pauley, and arguably the most frustrating thing about this Padres season with Tyler Wade, and some more stuff in just a second, guys. But first, look, you guys know I'm all about leaderboards. I'm known for this, dare I say. It's my most known feature. I love being on the top of the leaderboards and all that. And when it comes to just defeating and destroying and humiliating my friends, Monopoly Go is the place to go, man. I love it so much. And let me tell you, I've been kicking my friends' butts. What I like about this game, it lets you sow the disrespect. You want to take a wrecking ball to all the many iconic properties from Monopoly. Oh, yeah, the railroad. Maybe I'm going to get R by the game. And I'll tell him, hey, go purchase whatever, the Chesapeake, the yellow ones. I forgot what they're called. I will be absolutely gutting for that one and whatnot. That's right. Obviously, I'm talking Monopoly. It's fantastic. Downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great mobile twist on the classic Monopoly game. And you can, on top of the renting properties and being disrespectful, there's all these new dynamic boards and whatnot. So get on the action. Download Monopoly Go. Now free on the App Store and Google Play. But that's not all. I want to take a second to talk to you about the #1 daily fantasy sports app in America, this country. Well, depending on where you're listening from, but where me and Aram are from, it's the #1 app there with more than 3 million numbers. It's easy and it's very exciting. All you have to do is just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Aram, I don't know about you. If you're keeping up with the NBA playoffs, I know your team's been getting beat down. In my opinion, they have a built-in excuse, but nonetheless, yes. NBA playoffs are underway. Great Nuggets game. Frankly, you could probably just go over on every single stat with Nikola Jokic. You could probably do that, and you'll probably do well. And you could do it all sorts of things. You could do threes. You could do rebounds. You could do that. And, of course, this is a baseball podcast. They've got it for baseball, too, and they've got it for NHL with the NHL playoffs going around. They've got you covered. They've got celebrities on there like Meek Mill that you could be part of things as well. Pretty cool, right?
Can you do over missed shots by, like, Tyler Hero?
Oh, man. You probably can. Shouts to Prize Picks. Ooh, Tyler Hero. Remember when Shaq said that he was as good as Luka? Anyway, that was adorable. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 fantasy sports app. On top of all the weekly promotions and cool things that you can get in on, Download the app and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's right, Locked On MLB. After downloading the app, first deposit up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks. And just like that, everybody, we are back. Second segment here of the Locked On Padres podcast. Of course, remember, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where I just knocked over little Tatis. Hopefully that's not a bad omen. Now, Aram, speaking of bad omens, man, the Padres have had some weird players over the years. From your Jake Arrietas and your Vincent Velasquez, Robinson Cano to Nelson Cruz, Matt Carpenter to, who was one weird one that they had last year? Rougned Odor. There we go.
That was a weird one.
That was a weird one. The Padres have themselves another weird one, and his name's Tyler Wade. And I may or may not have been ranting about him on this podcast. I want to talk about Graham Pauley specifically, though. Graham Pauley has been called up for the Padres, and he is a guy that you went on a limb for. And this isn't a shot. Went on a limb for. You love Graham Pauley. You think that the bat is going to be great. There, in my opinion, I think there's a little bit of a question of where exactly he'll play. I don't know if I've seen, outfield, third base. The Padres have been playing him at third base as of late. They've started him at DH last night, where he didn't succeed all that well. But what is your perspective on Graham Pauley? Because, and it's more than just him, because for me, everyone knows my stance, but I imagine that they're curious to hear yours.
Yeah, I mean, I love Pauley as a prospect and as a hitter, and I think he's going to be a good big leaguer. It's funny, you mentioned like how it's reminiscent of the Campusano situation. It's reminiscent of the Campusano situation for me too, because I was a guy that very much liked the prospect that Campusano was. And, normally we have that natural progression to the big leagues. And I know not every progression is going to be the same, and development is not always linear, but it's easier when you can see the guy go through high A, double A, maybe triple A for a decent stint. And then when they're ready, when they're performing, get brought up to the big league level. And if they struggle a little bit, you see if they make the adjustments, you go from there. The thing with the Padres is, I think people kind of forget, because these guys get thrown up to the big leagues. I think they assume that they had that natural progression. And then when they're struggling at the big leagues, they get sent back down and they're back and forth. And it's like, oh, like maybe this is a quad A guy. Maybe it's not going to work. Graham Pauley, like this was a great identification. Another just great snag by, this front office and, the scouting department of the Padres. 13th round pick in 2022. I've talked to his Duke teammates who, said they always knew he was talented, but he kind of showed up that final year just looking way more physical and looking like just a different guy. And it was a late bloomer thing. Not a lot of teams caught on at that point. The Padres were one of them. So at that point, he's kind of a late bloomer, and he gets thrown right into, professional baseball, where in 2022, he gets a short little taste, puts up good numbers. Then 23 is really his first full taste of professional baseball. I mean, he destroys low A, college bat, they do that. Then gets to high A and puts up these crazy numbers. I think when you saw the 16 home runs in 45 games in a pitcher-friendly Fort Wayne, that's where it's like, okay, this guy can play. That's not that long ago, and he played 20 games in Double A, went to the Arizona Fall League for 21 more games, and now he's in the big leagues. That doesn't compute for me. This should have been a guy that was in Double A to start the season. And I understand that, there was the necessity of having somebody potentially helping that team with Machado hurt and things like that. I get it. And I understand that Pauley's not a guy that has a $5 million investment. So you're not as worried about rushing his development and things like that. But I think you have to look at Pauley now as a piece and a guy that you should handle with a little bit more care. And I just feel like he's been kind of ragdolled a little bit. I was shocked when I saw he had a seat on that flight, across the world.
Me too. Yeah.
I'm happy for him, no doubt. But I was shocked because I was like, ooh, I don't know how this is going to look. I think I even texted you and was like, this might be a little much. It might be a little early. Like when I saw him in Arizona, there was some really good swings. But even then, I'm like, okay, there's some things he needs to work on with breaking balls, swing and miss. Again, this guy's only had 168 games under his belt in the minor leagues, and that's including what he's played this season. So coming into this year, it was basically one full big league season under his belt, and a guy that hadn't really done much in college up until his final year. So I think he's just been rushed. I think it's been a little unfair to him. And now I just think he's kind of getting thrown out there in tough spots. More specifically, it's breaking balls, just high quality breaking balls that are tough for him. I mean, it's a pitch recognition thing. It's being able to maintain, your posture and get the same swingness off on those pitches. He hasn't seen that many high quality breaking balls, and now he's seeing the highest of quality breaking balls. It's a big leap for a guy, and I think it's just been an unfortunate situation for him. He went straight back to AAA. I know it's the PCL. Put up big numbers there. Like, again, he can hit, and I think that maybe had them thinking, oh, well, maybe he can come back. I'd like to just see him be in AAA for a few months and just get more comfortable, and then bring him back up. But I understand that they need somebody right now.
And then there's the whole other side of this, which is like the Padres' tendency to do this. You saw the same thing happen with CJ Abrams. And what frustrated me was about that situation. Everyone has been different, right? Not everyone's been Tatis and Merill, where like you called up CJ Abrams, but you have Ha-Seong Kim there. So I was like very early on, like, okay, cool. This might be a sick platoon where you just have defensive beasts maybe and some speed. But like, why are you forcing the issue? And then he comes up and he struggles and everyone's like, wow, yeah, you better get rid of him. And it's like, no, stop it. And then there's the issue with this, which is something I've been ranting about my show. If he wasn't on the roster, I would not be complaining about Tyler Wade getting starts as much. That's I have no issue with that. Because then it's like, okay, I viewed Graham Pauley as just someone who's more casual, not like a certified top 100 guy, not like Merill, who's a top 10 guy, which is like, okay, and they've needed some help in center. And it's not like they needed much like we just talked about with Grisham to be an improvement. With Graham Pauley, my thing is, why is he on the roster then? Why is he on the roster if Tyler Wade over his last 16 games is hitting below like 150 and slugging basically about as well as I did in high school? Why is that the thing that's stopping him then? If it is, then that tells me one of two things. Either you guys are pulling the same dumb stuff that you always do, or two, he's not ready. And if that case, why is he hitting? Because I don't think sporadic starts at third base every 7 days is going to be great. I understand that Eggy Rosario can't hit righties, but I'd rather just give the guy a shot every now and then. I don't think that he's going to be a 2 WRC plus guy against righties and then 400 against lefties. Like, I think it can even out a bit. I just feel like the way they've been handling this has been really poor so far. And it's the same thing with Campusano, where on top of not being ready, Austin Nola isn't that good. Why does he have a monopoly on this position? And then we saw what happened. And then I texted you about 48 times a day after Luis Campusano broke out last year.
No, I totally agree. And that's the thing is, like, look, Pauley could settle in at the big league level, but you got to give him consistent reps to do so. It can't be, hey, you're facing Jose Barrios and then, okay, you're on the bench for a couple more days. And I understand he got a favorable opportunity in Colorado against Ryan Feltner. But again, I think a big part of it, though, is, okay, he hasn't played for 3 days. It was coming off of a game where he got 2 ABs, 0 for 2 with a K against Barrios. You're going to start pressing more. Doesn't want to go back to El Paso. Like, I wouldn't want to, so it's a tough spot for him to be in too. And I get it. He's a professional and he can handle it and all that good stuff, but you got to think about the human aspect of it. Look at Jackson Holiday in Baltimore. He's playing consistently, but there's a human aspect that's affecting him, which is being the highest profile debut in a long time and being a guy that is like the only dude not hitting on a team with World Series aspirations. I can promise you that there's a lot of mental hurdles that go into that. And that's just naturally, the nature of the beast here. So if he's going to be up there, I'm with you. I'd rather see him play consistently, get reps, and you just got to shoulder it, put him in the 9-hole and hope that, eventually he settles in. But if you look at just his opportunities so far in the big leagues, I mean, how many starts has he really had? It's been a couple starts,
exactly.
like what, 4 or 5, and then a lot of the other appearances are pinch hit here, substitute here, and get 2 ABs. It's just not something that he's used to, and also I just think it sets him up for failure. I don't know what the better option is because I'm not as plugged into the nuance of like Eggy versus Graham and these spots and whatever. But I just think you need to be giving this guy consistent at bats because I actually do think he's a good, at the very least, platoon piece for you in the future and a versatile piece. If it's in AAA or in the big leagues, I don't care, but he needs to be playing consistently. You can't be ragdolling him like this.
Exactly. And my thing is this. It's one of two things. Either I'm okay if he goes up there and struggles for 6 straight games. Let's get it done. Then that's a little bit more. You have 6 games. Boom. This is your spot. Manny will be back soon anyway. So this is your spot. And God forbid, maybe he ends up performing well and then he's the DH going forward when Manny gets back. Or you send him down. And then you say, we're just running with Tyler Wade and Eggy Rosario right now. Because to me, this just doesn't track. Tyler Wade is the guy who's stopping this guy. Tyler Wade has never had a WRC plus above 95. His career OPS is 593. That is not, and I've said this on the podcast, Heimer Candelario, solid major leaguer. If that guy was on this team and struggling, I'd be like, no. But he's proven that he can be like a solid player, even if he's not a superstar. This guy has never been that. So to me, that's what's frustrating. It was very frustrating. Not frustrating, but like very like I've won it, but at what cost? When he had that really clutch RBI on Monday, Tyler Wade. I'm like, now they got to start it for 3 more weeks straight. So that's one of those two things I think needs to happen for this team, because you're running into the same issue. And maybe it's because Preller's just like, screw it, I'm trading this guy low key in 2 months. Because that's my vibe, where I'm like, he's just like, screw it. Maybe he lucks out and is great, and then I won't, or it increases his value, or he's already decided. Because that's what it keeps feeling like. That's what happened with Abrams. That's what happened with, your Hassels and all that type of stuff. So we'll have to see, man. We'll have to see. I'm curious, to say the least, to see how this goes forward. But one thing I don't have to be curious about, because I know it's locked in and always being great. It's always there for you. That's the good folks over at DoorDash. Here's the thing, folks. Here's the thing. I love using DoorDash and love using to get all my meals delivered straight to my door. And what I like is they've always got some cool deals on there as well. 50% off, ladies and gentlemen, if you use the podcast code Locked On MLB, off your next order, up to $15 when you spend 15 plus on your next, whatever it is. You could also be flowers, Valentine's Day pass, but still. Maybe, just something nice. You could do that, or something nice for yourself. Groceries, convenience, or retail orders now on DoorDash. Really great stuff. Go check it out. Again, get all of your gifts all in one place. Get all of your food all in one place. Locked On MLB to get 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 on your next stuff. I've been reading this in a very confusing way, but bottom line is Locked On MLB, guys. Go check that out for 50% off over at DoorDash. We love them very much. Go check it out. And just like that, we're back here, ladies and gentlemen, on the Locked On Padres podcast. It has been a fun talk on all things prospects. And now to veer a little bit away from the negative. We've been mostly positive, I think, on this episode still, but I want to talk about, I used the word reinforcements before, which is one of my favorite ways to describe prospects sometimes, because I think people sometimes are like, I think it says something, things are going to change. Maybe a player gets worse and you just have someone who could come in a little bit. This is one of the reasons the Dodgers succeed and the Braves succeed. It's not just because of money, but they have guys that could come up and just produce a little bit. For the Padres, I think that there's 3 main ones to talk about. One of which has been dealing, which is Jeremiah Estrada. Frankly, so is Robby Snelling. Then there's also Aram Mazur. Let's start first, I think, with Estrada, who you just tweeted about before we started recording. This Padres bullpen has been great. Estrada was making a lot of noise before the season, and it actually sounded like he was going to get called up, actually. I actually thought he was going to make the team, especially with Wusaka, one of their offseason additions, not making a team just yet. But he hasn't. But he's been awesome in AAA. What can you tell the good listeners about him?
Yeah, I mean, he's electric. And I called my shot on the Padres bullpen going into the year. I felt like that could easily be one of the better bullpens in baseball. And I think Estrada is going to be reinforcements for them very soon. Mm-hmm. It's a lively fastball. He's averaging 97 with it, but good characteristics. And it's just getting on hitters quick. But also the way that he's commanding the slider off of it, upper 70s, just nasty, absolutely sharp bite. So the fastball slider combination is enough. And then he'll sprinkle in a pretty good splitter here and there. That is just enough of a third look. He has been lights out over his last 5 outings. I mean, guys haven't even really had a chance. I mean, you're talking 6 innings, 15 strikeouts. It's a 75% strikeout rate over his last 5 appearances. I think he's kind of figured it out, just how to sequence the fastball slider location-wise, sprinkle in that splitter when he needs to. I think he could be a really solid 7th inning guy for the Padres as soon as this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's so exciting is the Padres bullpen has been very good, which you just talked about that you predicted. Robert Suarez has bounced back. You've got, Wandy Peralta who's dealing. You've got Yuki Matsui. Well, yeah, every now and then you're like, okay, are you getting a little bit lucky here? Doesn't matter, though. He's still been really good for a guy who's coming over from Japan already. So you have that. You have Enyel De Los Santos, which is low-key one of the best moves made this offseason for the Padres, where they just saved some money and got a guy who might even be better than Scott Barlow, at least right now he is. I think the
Yeah.
upside with Barlow is better, but still, he's been great. He's been awesome. He's been firm. Love him very much. I think that there are some players, like maybe do you dump a Johnny Brito? Dump is a harsh word, but maybe Johnny Brito gets sent back to AAA or Adrian Morejon, and you could bring in Estrada, just bring in a cannon, it seems like, to bolster the bullpen even more in case anything happens. I think that it's really good, and I've been really bullish. You like the Padres bullpen. I like the Padres depth this year. I just think that they have more options. I have no idea if some of them are going to work. But heck, Merrill's worked so far, so that's already showing you. It's just really cool to compound your stars with options. I don't even know if any of these guys will work, but just having guys, because years ago, what they have to do, I mentioned it earlier, Jake Arrieta, Vincent Velasquez. I know those are starting pitchers, but the sentiment is still the same. You don't want to be relying, and Rougned Odor, these type of guys. Instead, you're like the excitement of the unknown. And for me, Estrada, also for a team, you never know. I don't think that Robert Suarez is guaranteed to be elite. So it's cool to have a guy who has that upside coming in. Very excited about Estrada. I actually, would you be surprised if he gets called up sooner rather than later? Do you think that might be something?
No, I wouldn't be surprised at all, especially just because of the carousel that you have, unfortunately, with pitching health in general. But if you add like a doubleheader as well, like that's an easy no-brainer 27th guy to bring up as well, because you'll use him. I think that the fact that they have swing and miss guys, but having Estrada added into the fold as someone that can just come in there and bases loaded, one out, you need the punch, like can go out and get that punch out for you. Just having a guy like that isn't one of your high leverage arms, so you don't want to use your high leverage arm in the 6th or the 7th. Maybe having another guy that can get swing and miss there, I think is a big reason why they may ultimately go that route if someone's underperforming or if someone gets banged up. I think he's just about ready because the command has been what's really stood out too.
Absolutely. Speaking of underperforming, let's now pivot a little bit to the starting pitching side of things, because the Padres kind of low-key getting carried by Dylan Cease right now, at least just a little bit. You've had some sporadic starts here from Matt Waldron, but Michael King's been really up and down. Got absolutely obliterated last night by the Rockies. I'm not obliterated, but he had like the one bad inning. The Dodgers are the actual team that killed him. Whatever. But you had Michael King, and then you have Joe Musgrove. His velo stuff has been a little bit weird. Hasn't thrown 194, and then Darvish is on the IL. So low-key, this team, bullpen has been kind of carrying them a bit, and then Dylan Cease. I want to talk about Robby Snelling and Aram Leighton. We'll start with Snelling. He is the Padres' top pitching prospect. He has been for a while. I think there are some people who might argue let's go every now and then, but I feel like the consensus is Snelling. What have you seen from him in the minors? Because I think he is one of the other big X factors for this team, potentially in the second half, or depending on how this rotation does, potentially soon.
Yeah, so it's always fun when I get a chance to catch up with a guy before the season, hear about what he's working on, and then see like, is he actually doing it? Yeah. Like is he actually doing what he was focusing on? And Snelling had him on the call up before the season, and first of all, really cool guy, just absolute competitor. Guy that makeup wise you're going to bet on, just a bulldog on the mound. But the one thing that he said was, I've been working on this changeup all off season. Like I've just had that changeup grip in my hand pretty much all day, every day. And that was the thing I wanted to kind of monitor going into the year. So far, it's 3 starts, but so far through his 3 starts, he's been throwing his changeup more than his curveball, and he's been landing it at a strike at a 72% clip. For a changeup, that's fantastic. So I think that's been a big part of it, a big part of the success for him. His fastball command actually hasn't quite been there for him relative to where it was last year. I'm not going to worry about that because the command is great overall. He has been walking some guys, and it's mostly been because of the fastball command. So the fact that he's been able to be so successful despite that, through these 3 starts in Double-A, pitched to a sub-2 ERA, is because of the changeup being there for him consistently, and the curveball as well. He's landed that for a strike 72% of the time. So the fastball command is going to come back. It just seems to be the one thing that has just been evading him a bit so far this year. And once that fastball command comes back, you're going to have 3 pitches that he can throw in any count, spot up wherever he wants. And he's probably not going to be an ace because the stuff isn't, enough, but he's going to be such a solid and sound left-handed pitcher that this is the kind of guy that you could potentially be more aggressive with. And I'm always more willing to be aggressive with pitchers. I think it's a lot different than hitters, and the progression is totally different, especially nowadays. But I think Snelling does have the ingredients to be a guy that could come up to the big leagues and be a back end rotation starter for you pretty quickly, as long as that fastball command kind of gets back to where it needs to be. And remember, he threw a lot of innings last year. He threw over 100 first full professional season and threw a postseason game. So, I think that's a guy that they could be looking at the back half of the year to come up and help them.
Yeah, he absolutely did from A to high A to double A all in last year. Like, has been one of those guys who's progressed really quickly. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm really curious to see how this pans out. So, Padres fans, if you're worried about starting pitching, yes, totally fair to be concerned, but it's very cool that the future of Padres starting pitching seems to have some really top tier guys. I know Dylan Lesko added a cutter slider. Speaking of things that you talked about, I remember you texted me about that, and then the report came out, I'm going to say like 2 hours later.
Yeah.
So that was very funny. I also want to talk about Aram Mazur, who you told me about has been dealing as well. He's been successful. What can you tell us about him? Because I feel like he's a little bit, not a little bit, a lot more underrated and not as talked about compared to Lesko and Snelling.
And I think the guy that could be first up in terms of like the top 10 prospects in their system and pitching wise that could come up and help them immediately. Mazur doesn't have stuff that jumps off of the page, but he's been a guy that I've liked for a while and just seems to get better and better and better every time you check in. His command is just, I think it's up there with just about anybody, any starting pitching prospect in the minor leagues that's not a top 100 guy. And I think he's knocking on the door of the top 100 because of the way that he can command his entire arsenal. Through 3 starts so far this year, 16 innings, 2 walks, 16 Ks. He's allowed just 1 home run, 1 earned run, and it's come on a home run that, to be honest, was just a total cheap shot. 91 off the bat that like just doesn't get out in the big leagues, 360 feet. So that's the only earned run that he's given up. It's kind of a cheap shot that got out in a little bit of a launch pad environment. What stands out to me with him is the fastball shape is not like the best, but he's improved it to where I think it's got above average carry. But now he's sitting 95 miles an hour and spotting it. So that sets the tone. But then he has a slider, a curveball, and a changeup, all of which he is landing for a strike 68% of the time or more. And if you go across his entire arsenal, just the overall strike rate, 72.5%. So this guy's filling up the zone with 4 pitches, sitting 95 with his fastball, mixing up each of his offerings. And I think it's just it's almost like that perfect like MLB The Show, like 4-pitch mix that you want to put together, right? Where you have the fastball, the slider, the curveball, and the changeup. And they're all at different speeds. The fastball is 95, the slider is 87, the curveball is 81, and the changeup's 88, 89. And so he's got the pitches for the lefties, he's got the pitches for the righties, he's executing them well. And it just seems like he's kind of figured out who he is as a pitcher. 23 years old. I think he's a guy. And we've seen a lot of pitchers in the Texas League, AA, just jump straight up to the bigs, because if you're getting outs in the Texas League, like you might as well just go see how you're going to do up there. A lot of times the PCL can kind of be mental warfare for pitchers, start to nibble, not trust your stuff as much. And Texas League's already pretty hitter friendly. PCL is a whole nother beast. So he could be a guy that ends up making that jump up. We saw Brian Wu make that jump up from the Texas League. We saw several other arms last year do that. Mazur, I think, should be the first guy up starter wise. And I think, it's early, but he looks just about ready. They just need to stretch him out more. And they're already doing that. 56 pitches first time out, 53 pitches the second time out, 73 pitches in his third outing. When we see him get to that 80 pitch range, I think that's when we could start to look for, a potential call up if they need it.
Yeah, you mentioned the stretching him out more. One thing about Padres, they don't really hide what their intentions are with their players. Everyone knows that they tend to rush their prospects occasionally for good, most often, as we've talked about, a little bit for worse. But I wouldn't be surprised. I mentioned earlier in the episode, like the Jackson Merrill thing, that like they tried to get him out there in left field. That was a report back in August, but they ended up not doing it. But honestly, shocking that they didn't. Let's just be honest. Like, I'm just surprised. But now, to close things out, I want to ask you, who are some other overlooked, I should say, prospects, ones that you think fans should keep an eye on, whether or not they may debut this year, but especially if you think that they could be contributors for this 2024 team?
Ooh, that's a good question. Of course, everyone's talking about DeVries, and, I love Dylan Head. And there's, I think there's a lot of fun bats, and Martarella's been off to a hot start and swinging it pretty well.
Burgert, maybe?
I'd say Braden Nett. Braden Nett is a guy that, right-handed pitcher that just has some really good stuff. He stood out to me also when I was out at the Arizona Fall League, and I know he hasn't been great out of the gate, so it's just a guy that I would be a little bit patient with, see how they're going to use him. I don't know what exactly the deal has been. They've been very short with him, and again, the numbers haven't been great, but that's a guy that I wouldn't just forget about right away, because I do think that there's some good ingredients there. I mean, the fastball can get up to the upper 90s. He's sitting 95, 96, hammer of a curveball, a good cutter as well. So that's definitely a guy that, I'm excited about and just want to see what he can do. I think it at least could be, a big league reliever, one way or another. Another name that, I think is probably worth monitoring, and I know probably comes with a little bit more attention because of the fact that he was, somewhat of a higher draft pick and came out to, a good start last year, is Homer Bush. Again, I know he's not doing well, so I wanted to highlight guys that are not doing well that I think could start to settle back in. Bush is putting up good contact rates. He's has a really good approach overall. He's been struggling just with the higher quality breaking balls that he's seeing right now in high A, and he's had some tough matchups recently. Had to deal with Reds first rounder Rhett Lauder, things like that. I like Bush. I do have a question of how much impact's going to be there, but I still think he's a fun prospect that deserves a little bit more attention and shouldn't just be kind of forgotten right away because he's not off to the best start. He did look really well, really good out of the gate. Last year though, right after the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also curious. Last one, I think I might have interrupted you almost and you didn't hear. Ryan Bergert is another one who I've been curious about. I've heard some decent things. Do you have any sort of takeaways? Because look, frankly, this Padres system is to me always fascinating. I just think that the fact that they trade every 3 minutes, they didn't make a trade just now, but the fact that they literally can at every time. There are other teams who haven't done anything in a while trade wise that have a worse farm system than the Padres. And then you have a guy like Berger. Do you think that is someone who could potentially be worth keeping an eye on, even if it's for next year?
Absolutely. I think when you look at the way that he can command, his stuff so far, 17 strikeouts, 1 walk, filling up the zone with the heater, and it's a pretty good one. Gets a lot of chase on that. Mixes in slider, changeup as well. It's probably another guy that we could see get pushed up a little bit quicker if they don't want to, rush Snelling up there. And has had a couple really solid outings in Double A so far. So I definitely think that's a guy 24 years old. We could see maybe first, even ahead of Mazur potentially, if they want to bring someone up just kind of as a spot guy to get some action. So no, I think what he's done so far has been really impressive. And again, they just seem to continue to identify and develop these guys that just keep getting better. And I think he's a perfect example.
Love to hear it. As always, Aram, love to have you on the podcast as well. If you would like, you can plug for the good people anything else you've got going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to go back and listen to those preseason interviews, we had Dylan Lesko, Robby Snelling as well. That was really fun hearing, Lesko talk about how tight he is with Snelling, hearing Snelling talk about, working with Ethan Salas and things like that was really cool. But we're also, covering the minor leagues on the call up all the time and keeping you up to date there with the top prospects. And then of course the Just Baseball show, we were talking about, baseball, Major League Baseball and minor league baseball, everything across every single day of the week. So you can check that out as well. And we just put out a mock draft on justbaseball.com. And of course had one of the sweetest swinging lefties I could find going to the Padres because that's what they do. But you can go check out that mock draft at justbaseball.com and we'll be breaking that down on the call up later this week as well.
Absolutely love that. In terms of this week, guys, well, we've got this episode. Might be doing a preview, crossover series preview with Connor Thomas over of Locked On Phillies. So look forward to that. I really want to beat that team because I love how much Philadelphia sports is suffering right now, and I would like to contribute to more of it. But regardless, everyone, you've been listening to the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow the show on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, or at Aram Leighton 8 on Twitter as well. You can check him out for all of his very fun baseball updates. Until next time, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies. Take care.